that Heroku hosting class ended up being a bit longer and a bit more convoluted than I was really expecting it to be. So I thought the best thing to do would be just to re-record it and just go kind of methodically through each of the steps that we ended up with. And hopefully it'll be easier to refer to kind of going on from there. So we'll just smash on with that. Let's do it. Cool. So the first thing you're going to want to make sure that you do is log into Heroku, sign up for a Heroku account, and then you're going to install the Heroku command line interface, and we're going to need that later on. So you just come down to the Mac OS one, copy that across, go into your terminal and run it there. It'll take a while because it's going to update and brew first, and then it'll install the command line interface, but we shall use that later on. The first bit of housekeeping, you're going to go into your Ruby project folder, and you want to delete things like the kind of debugging tools. So get rid of binding.pry and require pry. The next thing we're going to do, so very similar to the way npm works for JavaScript, is we're going to use a gem called bundler, and that's going to let us tell Heroku which extra packages that we need for our program to run. So you're going to do gem install bundler. I already have it, so it's going to go pretty quickly, and that's just going to let us kind of crack on with the next step. In order to tell bundler which packages we need, we're going to create a gem file. So it's a capital G, there's no extension, it's just touch gem file. We're then going to go into this gem file. First of all, we're going to tell it where we want to get all the gems from. So the source, HTTPS, and that's going to be Ruby gems. I'm going to say do, and then we'll say go and get the gems that I want. So the ones that we need are Sinatra. We also need Sinatra contrib. And the last one that I need is PG. So those are the three that everyone's going to need. You may have extra packages. Not all of the gems that you've required in that you'll need. So for example, I use date, but I don't need to import that because that comes with Ruby in the first place. So I need those ones, you may need some other ones. So we're going to save that. Once you've got that saved, we're going to kind of initialize that. So we'll say bundle install. When we run that bundle install, it's going to create us a gem file lock, and that's just going to set in each of the version numbers and the dependencies that that program's going to need to run. Cool. The next thing we're going to need is a prop file. So we're going to touch prop file. So this is your process file. It's going to tell Heroku what to do with all of the files that we're sending it. So it's got a few parts. The first part is we're going to say web. So we're telling Heroku that we want to run a web process when it runs our server. So that's going to allow external HTTP requests, and it's going to allow us to send and receive data from that. So we're going to go web. We'll say bundle exec. So we want to use the bundle that we've just put in. That's saying to Heroku, these are the gems I need. Please install them. Please use those. And then you're going to run your file the same way you normally would. So ruby main.rb. Mine is called main. Yours might be called app or entry point or something like that. And the final part, I'm going to say I want you to run on the port that I'm telling you to run on, and that's just going to be port. So that this value is going to come from Heroku itself. It's going to tell it in which port to run. So again, we're running a web process. We're using the bundle that we just made. We're going to then run the file as our web process, and it's going to be run on this port. Awesome. So that's kind of the first part that we need to sort out. We're going to go on to Heroku now. Once you log into Heroku, you'll see the screen where your apps live. I've got a few at the moment, but we're going to make a new one. Create new app. The app name, it's going to be the name of your project. I'm just going to do Fraser Heroku demo. Yep, it's available, and we're in Europe. Create the app. Cool. Once we've created the app, what we want to do to start with is go into resources, because we're going to need a Postgres database from which to store and retrieve our data from. So we'll come into add-ons. That's going to be Postgres, and we want Heroku Postgres. Perfect. And we're going to provision that. Perfect. So we can see that we've got a database. If you come in, click into that. You're going to see we currently have an empty database, and we can view its settings. So we've got different credentials. So we've got our password, hostname, all that sort of stuff. Perfect. So we come out of that. The next thing we're going to need to do is figure out how do we connect to the database, how do we run the bits and pieces that we're trying to do. So if you go back to our project file, the way that we normally talk to the database is in SQL Runner. You can see the current setup is for my local host with the name of the project. So we're going to get rid of that and put in a new hash. And we're going to need to access, essentially in this space, the location of our Postgres database on Heroku. So that's a bit of a pain, but it's not too bad. Kind of once you've kind of been through that. So at the top, we're going to need to require in another gem. So this gem is URI. This gem allows us to kind of take in a URL, turn it into a URI object, and then pull out the parts that we're needing for the configuration variables that we're going to use. So in order to use that, we're going to go in SQL Runner. We're going to say our URI object that we want is going to be equal to URI, which is what we're bringing in from the URI gem, and we're going to parse in where all the information is, where our database name, host name, password, username, all that sort of thing. In order to find that, you would go into your main app, into settings, reveal config variables, and it's this big nasty thing. It's got all the information. We don't actually need to look at that. We don't need it. We're going to pull all of our information from there. So how do we access that once we're inside Heroku? Well, that URL is stored as a config variable, an environment variable. Sorry. So we'll say env, capital ENV, to access our environment variables, and we're going to look for a specific one. The one that we're looking for is database URL, so it's underscore all caps. Once we've got that in, we can then pull out the bits and pieces of information that we need. So the first thing we're going to need is a host name. That's going to be uri.host. We're going to need their database name. This one's a bit different. It's going to be uri.path. And then one ... -1. So this syntax is a bit weird, but the database name is stored in the part that's called the path, and we don't want the first value. So if we have a look at that, the whole path is this part, and it starts with the /, and we don't want the /. So I'm saying ignore the first one, but give me the rest of it. Once you've got the database name, we want to say user. This one's a bit simpler. It's going to be uri.user. And then we're going to have password. And that's uri. So that all makes sense. The brilliant thing about this is we can kind of post this up to GitHub, we can store this, we can share these files, but our hostname, our username, our password, it's all protected. No one else can access that because it's coming in from our own kind of locked Heroku user area. Awesome, cool. The next thing we're going to need to do is, once this is all set up, how do we access the database? So how do we create like how do we run our SQL file to establish our table setup, and how do we seed that database? So first thing we'll do is we'll get this up and running. So yeah, so that's the first thing that we'll do. So this is where you need that Heroku command line interface. We're going to say Heroku login. When you do that, it's going to ask you to press a key, and that's going to take you direct to Heroku in the browser, where we can say login. Perfect. So now we're logged in. We want to access the database. So how did we access the database when we're doing it locally? Well, we'd say something like PSQL -d, the name of the database, then the file that we want to run in it, which mine is called managem.sql. And that's how we would create all these tables in that situation. So we obviously can't do that right now, but we're going to do something very similar. So we want to access our Heroku provisioned Postgres database. So we're going to say Heroku PG : PSQL. So that's how we're going to access that. We don't need the -d because that's how we're getting that database. That Heroku PG PSQL is how we're getting there in the first place. And it's not going to be database name, it's going to be database URL. So that's where we're going. So we're going to Heroku, accessing our Postgres database with that URL, and then we're running our file to establish that. So let's run that. Oh, missing a flag. What have I done? Oh, okay, it's not working because we've not actually put the app up yet. So let's do that. So we're going to do git add all, git commit, say Heroku setup. In order to be able to push up to Heroku, we're going to need to establish that as a remote repository. So if we go in to here, go into deploy, scroll down, and then we're going to copy in this part. So this is just saying Heroku set up as a remote Git repository, and it's going to be the name of my app, which is Fraser Heroku demo. So let's establish that. Cool. So I've set that remote Git as that address, and now we can do git push Heroku master. So we're pushing our master branch up to this new repo that we've called Heroku. So let's push that up. It will take a little bit of time because it's going to push up all of our files, and then it's going to establish the app, and it's going to try and run it with the prop file and the bundle that we've kind of set up with it. So I'll just wait for that to finish. You can see it's installing all the dependencies that it needs. It knows that it's using Ruby, it's recognized as a Ruby file. And now it's just trying to deploy it on its server. Cool. So that's it deployed. We can try it now. We know that it's not going to work because it doesn't have the database attached, but we can just show that quickly. Is that already? Cool. Turn on server error. Because I try and access the database on my homepage, it's already producing that error. Yours might work for the homepage, but then not give you any of the pages where you're recalling data. So now we can go back to here, and we can run the step where we're going to create the database. So now it's successfully connected to that Postgres provision because we have the app there. I'm just going to run it again just to make sure that it works completely. Yeah, so it's successfully dropping all the tables and creating all the tables as we need them. Cool, check. So what have we got so far? We've pushed the app up successfully. It's sitting there, and we've created all the tables, which are now sitting empty. So now we just need to seed those essentially. This bit is a bit more hacky. I'm sure there are better solutions out there, but the one that I settled on is we're going to create a Heroku seeds file. So touch db / Heroku seeds RB. Yeah. So the reason we have to do this is if you look in the SQL runner, we're parsing in this database URL. Now, this database URL exists when we're in the land of Heroku, but it doesn't exist when we're on our own laptops. So we need to pass this in and tell it what to look for. So because we're going to put this file locally, we don't want to push this Heroku seeds file up to anywhere where someone could steal our passwords and see all that information. So we're also going to create a get ignore. Spell it correctly, get ignore. And inside that get ignore, we're going to ignore this Heroku seeds file. And that means we can keep that nice and private. In this Heroku seeds file, we're going to need to put in that database URL from Heroku. So we'll say environment database URL, and that's going to equal that URL. And at the bottom, we're going to require relative, and that's going to be our actual seeds file. And the reason we want to do it in this order is we're setting an environment variable, and then we want to run the seeds file. So it's going to run because usually when we require a relative, we're just bringing in methods or classes that we want to then use in the file that we've required them in. But in this case, the file that's required in, it's actually doing something. So it's going to run creating members, it's going to do all this sort of stuff. So when we require it in, it's just going to go and perform that behavior, and we want that to happen after we've set this database URL. So I'm just going to do this step quickly. So you'll go into settings, reveal config variables, and you want to copy this. And you're going to copy that and you're going to paste it in there. Cool, and then we'll just come out of that. So you've got that all set up. So it's database URL with the database URL in it and the seed file. That means that when we're running it locally, our SQL runner is able to send and retrieve requests from our database, our Heroku database, rather than the local one. Whereas without that file, this line would fail because it wouldn't be able to see the environment database URL, environment variable database URL. Cool. Hope that all makes sense so far. We don't actually have to push that up because all we've done is we've added a get ignored file, but it's not a problem when we do push it up. What it means though now is we can do ruby db slash Heroku seeds, and that will seed our database on the Heroku server. So my seeds file is pretty heavy, so it's just going to take a while. Yeah, so we'll just wait for that to install. But as we're going through that, just a quick reminder of everything we've done so far. So we installed Bundler, which was kind of like our NPM for JavaScript. We created our gem file, which is getting the gems from the Ruby Gems website. I've just got Sinatra, contrib, and PG. Then we do bundle install. That creates the gem file lock, which is what's going to tell Heroku which versions of which gems and software that we need to run our app. Then we created the prop file, which is going to run a web process using our bundle, and it's going to run our app on its specified port. We then provisioned the database on Heroku, which is here. Then once we'd done that, we ran our we ran our command to create all the tables for our database. So that's PG PSQL database URL, SF, and the file with our table information in it. And then now we're just trying to run the seeds. Okay, so that's finished running, and now we can go and have a look at our website. So let's have a open Chrome, put in our website address, and open it up. Cool. So yep. So this is the finished thing. You can see that the website is displaying on Heroku, and it's performing calls to the database, counting the number of members and bookings. If you click on one of the tables, you can see that it's being populated from our database. So that's it, all done.